The morning my grandmother's estate was divided, my brother wore a tie. That's the detail I remember most. Not the lawyer's voice droning through the will, not the way my mother kept smoothing her skirt. My brother, standing there, in a pressed white shirt and a navy tie, like he had somewhere important to be afterward, like this was just a formality before the real celebration. He got the house in Pasadena. 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a backyard with a fig tree my grandmother had planted the year she got married. He got the savings accounts, the jewelry, the car, a 2019 Lexus she barely drove. He got everything that had a number attached to it, everything you could photograph and post and be proud of. I got the storage unit. Unit 14 at Clearwater Self-Storage on the edge of Pomona, registered in my grandmother's name since 1987. My brother laughed when the lawyer read it out. Not a cruel laugh. Or maybe it was. I was still deciding. But the kind that meant obviously. Like, of course the storage unit went to me. Of course it did. I didn't fight it. That was always my problem, according to my mother. I didn't fight things. I let them happen to me, and then I went home and cried in the shower and told myself it was fine. This time, I drove straight to Pomona. My grandmother raised us after our parents divorced. Me and my brother. He's 4 years older, and from the beginning, my grandmother treated that gap like it was a credential. He was the responsible one, the firstborn. The one who took out the trash without being asked, who got a business degree from Cal Poly, who married a woman named Stella who made everything feel like a performance. Sunday dinners at my grandmother's house. Stella would arrive with store-bought cake on a ceramic platter, acting like she'd baked it herself. My grandmother loved it. I was the one who sat with my grandmother on Tuesday afternoons when no one else came. I was the one who drove her to dialysis appointments. I was the one who learned how to reorder her prescriptions through her insurance portal because her eyesight was going and the print was too small. But I was also the one without a degree. Without a house. Without a husband in a navy tie. I worked customer service for a property management company. 8 years. I knew lease agreements, building codes, maintenance logs, tenant disputes. I was good at it. My grandmother used to say I had a mind for systems, the kind of person who reads the fine print when everyone else just signs. She meant it as a compliment. My brother heard it as an insult on his behalf. The last 2 years of her life, I moved into her spare room, paid a reduced rent, handled the house, kept her company. My brother said I was taking advantage of her. Stella agreed, loudly, at Christmas. My grandmother died in March. The will had been written in 2019, before the dialysis, before the Tuesday afternoons. Unit 14, Clearwater Self-Storage, was not a nice facility. It was the kind of place that smelled like mildew and motor oil, where the gate code hadn't been updated since the Obama administration. The woman at the front desk handed me a key on a yellow plastic tag and pointed me toward the back row without looking up from her phone. I found Unit 14 at the far end, behind a row of orange roll-up doors. The padlock was old, the kind you needed to jiggle to get the shackle to release. It took me 3 tries. The door rolled up and a wall of heat hit me. It was April, and Pomona in April already feels like the rest of the country in July. The unit was packed floor to ceiling. Furniture covered in drop cloths. Cardboard boxes stacked in columns, the tape yellowed and cracking. A smell I couldn't place at first. Something dusty and oily and sweet underneath. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I stood there in the parking lot heat and thought, this is it. This is my inheritance. I took a breath. Then I started taking inventory. I didn't know what I was looking for. I was just doing what I always did at work. Audit first, understand later. I had a notepad and a pen, and I moved through the unit systematically, lifting drop cloths, reading box labels, trying to understand what 35 years of my grandmother's storage looked like. Most of it was ordinary. Old dining chairs, a rolled-up area rug, boxes of paperback novels, a portable Singer sewing machine in a hard case, Christmas decorations that had probably last been used when my father was still in the picture. But in the back right corner, there were items that didn't fit. 4 large wooden crates, the kind with metal corner reinforcements, no labels, heavier than the furniture. I tried to shift one and it didn't move. Each one was sealed with a different padlock, and underneath the drop cloth in the far corner, something long and low covered in a canvas tarp that was a different quality from everything else. Heavier fabric, the kind of tarp you use when you actually care about what's underneath. I lifted one corner. It was a guitar case. Then another, then another. 7 guitar cases laid end to end against the back wall. My grandmother did not play guitar. I stood there for a long time. My grandmother had never mentioned a storage unit, not once in all the Tuesday afternoons and dialysis drives and prescription refills. The unit had been registered in her name since 1987, and she had never said a word about it. The rent was on autopay from an account I hadn't known existed until the estate lawyer mentioned it. I made a decision standing in that heat. I stopped thinking like a granddaughter trying to grieve. I stopped trying to make sense of what I felt. I shifted into the only gear that had ever served me, the one I used at work when a tenant dispute had 17 moving parts and no one had documented anything properly. Logistics. I took photographs of everything. The crates, the cases, the layout of the unit. I noted the dimensions of each crate. I found a serial number stamped on the base of one of them and photographed that too. I spent 2 hours in that unit and I documented everything before I touched anything. Then I drove home and I opened my laptop. The padlocks on the guitar cases were old but not complicated. A locksmith I'd used for a tenant situation, his name was Pete. Retired police, the kind of person who asked no questions and charged fair rates, opened all 7 in under 20 minutes. I will never forget the moment I lifted the first lid. The guitar inside was not what I expected. It wasn't a decorative piece, it was a 1958 Gibson Flying V original finish, original hardware, the kind of thing that had no business sitting in a storage unit in Pomona for God knows how long. Pete made a sound when he saw it. Not words, just a sound. I didn't know what I was looking at, not specifically, but I knew enough to know it was significant. The way Pete stepped back from the case like he needed distance to understand it, that told me everything. By the time we opened the 7th case, we had 2 more Gibson Flying Verses, a 1959 Les Paul standard that Pete kept circling back to stare at, a Fender Telecaster with a name scratched into the strap button that I photographed immediately, a resonator guitar I couldn't immediately identify, and a 12-string acoustic in a case lined with what looked like original 1960s foam. I closed all the cases. I thanked Pete. I locked the unit. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot for 15 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. My grandmother had been married once before my grandfather. I knew that the way you know things that aren't discussed. In fragments, in the way a topic gets redirected. A first marriage in the early 1960s before she moved to California. She never talked about it. I had assumed it ended badly. I had assumed it was a private grief she'd carried, and I respected that enough not to ask. What I found in the estate paperwork, once I knew to look, was a name. Walter Bream, musician. Working in the Chicago blues circuit in the late 1950s and early 1960s, my grandmother had been married to him from 1961 to 1963. I spent 3 nights on the internet. Walter Bream never made it famous. He recorded 2 singles on a small label in 1962, played sessions for other artists, toured regionally. By 1964, he was gone from the circuit, and by 1970, no one was writing about him anymore. He died in 1981. I found an obituary in the Chicago Tribune archives, 12 lines long, no surviving family listed. But in 1961 and 1962, Walter Bream had owned instruments. The Telecaster strap button name wasn't his. It was a session player he toured with. And when I ran that name through vintage guitar registries, 3 separate collectors had flagged instruments from that same touring period as missing, provenance unknown. I understood then. The cases weren't heirlooms. They were an archive. I didn't tell my brother. I thought about it, genuinely thought about calling him. Because that's the kind of person I am. The kind who still reaches for fairness even when fairness has already left the room. I thought about it for about 48 hours. Then I remembered him laughing in the lawyer's office. The navy tie. Stella's expression when the storage unit was read out loud. I called an appraiser instead. Her name was Meredith. She came out of retirement for specific instrument consultations, and she had the kind of credentials that made auction houses return her calls the same day. She wore reading glasses on a chain, and she moved through the guitar cases with the focused quiet of someone who had done this enough times not to perform excitement. She examined each instrument for almost 4 hours. She made notes I couldn't read. She took measurements. She ran serial numbers on a database on her phone. At the end, she took her glasses off, set them on the case of the Les Paul, and looked at me. Do you know what provenance documentation you have for these? I told her about Walter Bream, the marriage, the storage unit registered since 1987. She was quiet for a moment. The 1959 Les Paul Standard, she said, in this condition, with verified provenance, will sell for somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 at auction. I waited. The pair of flying Visas together, she continued, assuming the documentation holds, I would estimate between $800,000 and $1.2 million combined. I sat down on a furniture box. The Telecaster, she said, is the complicated one. If the name on the strap button is who I think it is, and if we can establish chain of custody, you are looking at a record sale. I asked her how much. She gave me a range. The bottom of that range was still a number I had never associated with myself. The crates took longer. Inside them, packed in acid-free paper that had been placed there with care, were original concert posters, not reproductions. Originals. From the Chicago blues circuit late 1950s through mid-1960s. Posters for musicians whose names I only half recognized, but whose images I had seen in documentary footage. Posters in conditions that Meredith, when I sent her photographs, responded to at 11 o'clock at night. There was also a reel-to-reel tape recorder in one of the crates, and 6 tape reels in individual archival boxes. She told me to call a music archivist before I touched them. I called 2. My brother called me in June, not about the storage unit. He didn't know about any of it yet. He called because the estate taxes were coming due and there were some paperwork items he needed my signature on. And also, while he had me, he wanted to let me know that he and Stella were thinking of listing the Pasadena house. Downsizing. And if I wanted any of the furniture before the estate sale, I should probably come by soon. He said furniture the way you say a word you don't think deserves to be spoken. I told him I was a little busy. He asked with what. I said I was dealing with the storage unit. There was a pause, the kind that has a smirk in it. Oh yeah, he said. How's that going? It's going, I said. I let him laugh a little. Then I said I had to go. I had a call with an auction specialist at Christie's, which was true. He didn't respond to that. I heard Stella say something in the background. Then the call ended. Christie's worked with Meredith on the instrument appraisals. The process took 4 months. Provenance research, authentication, the tape reels, which turned out to contain unissued session recordings from 1962 featuring musicians whose estates were immediately and very seriously interested. There were conversations with music historians. A professor from USC who specialized in Chicago electric blues drove to Pomona and spent 6 hours in my living room with his laptop and a stack of photocopies. There was a moment in August, sitting across from a Christie's specialist named Warren, who had the careful manner of someone who dealt with high-stakes things daily, when he showed me the final pre-auction estimates. The 1959 Les Paul Standard had authenticated provenance. The Telecaster chain of custody was established. The pair of flying verses were confirmed original condition instruments from a period when Gibson's production numbers meant fewer than 200 existed in the world. The concert poster archive was being acquired by a music history nonprofit. That conversation was separate, but it mattered to me. It felt like what my grandmother would have wanted. The tape reels were being handled by 3 different estates and would likely end up in a university archive. That felt right, too. The instruments were going to auction in November. Warren showed me the low-end estimate for the total sale, then the high-end. I had to ask him to write the number down because I didn't trust myself to have heard it correctly. My brother found out in October, not from me, From Stella, who had a college friend who followed vintage instrument news online and had seen a pre-auction feature in a trade publication. The feature mentioned a private collection from a Pomona estate. It didn't name me, but it named the instruments. He called me at 7 in the morning. "What did you find in that storage unit?" Not a question. A statement with a question's clothing. I told him. He was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then, that should have been part of the estate. It was part of the estate, I said. It was left to me. She didn't know what was in there. She knew exactly what was in there, I said. She rented that unit for 36 years. She paid for it herself, on auto-pay, from an account she set up before I was born. That's insane. Okay. You can't just… That money should be… My name is on the storage unit, I said. My name is on the unit. It was in the will. You were in the room. I heard Stella in the background. Her voice was a different pitch than usual. "We're going to talk to a lawyer," my brother said. "That's your right," I said. "My lawyer's name is Sandra Okafor. She's with Bremer and Associates in Pasadena. Feel free to have yours reach out." I had learned how to say lawyers' names in a specific way. 8 years of tenant disputes taught me that. The way you say a name like it's already been decided. He hung up. The auction was in November, a Thursday. I wore a gray blazer and sat in the back. Warren had offered me a seat at the front, and I said no, I didn't need to be seen. I just needed to be there. The first Flying V came up in the third lot. The bidding started at 300,000 and moved with a speed that felt unreal. I watched the number on the display board. It paused. It went again. It stopped at $940,000. I looked at the ceiling. The second Flying V went to a private collector for just over $1 million. The Les Paul Standard sold for $380,000. The Telecaster, the one with the name on the strap button, set a record for that particular instrument's maker. I won't say the number here because I still don't entirely believe it. By the end of the day, the total sale was approximately $4.6 million before Christie's commission and taxes. I sat in the car in the parking garage for a long time. I called my friend back home, a woman I've known since the 4th grade, and she cried before I finished talking. She knew. She kept saying, "Your grandmother knew." My brother's lawyer sent a letter in December claiming the instruments constituted undisclosed estate assets. Sandra wrote back with the storage unit records, the will language, the auto-pay documentation, and a 12-page letter. I will not reproduce in full except to say it ended the conversation. My brother did not call after that. I didn't call him either. I'm not angry at him. That's the honest version. I'm not carrying it anymore. He made the choices he made and got what the will gave him, and the fact that he spent so long looking at what seemed like value that he never looked at what seemed like nothing, that's not something I caused, that's something he did himself. My grandmother knew I would look. She knew I would document it, investigate it, track down the names, make the calls. She knew I would sit in a parking lot in Pomona in the April heat and think, "There's more here. Let me find it." She knew me. I still work in property management. Different company now. I moved to a smaller firm in Glendale where I run the operations side. The work makes sense to me in a way it always has. I'm not trying to be anything other than what I am. I bought a condo in Alhambra. 2 bedrooms. A small deck where I put a fig tree in a planter, the same variety my grandmother grew in Pasadena. It's not the same tree, but it's something. Part of the sale proceeds went to a music education nonprofit in Chicago that works specifically with kids in the neighborhoods where those instruments were originally played. That felt important. It felt like closing a loop that had been open since 1963. The rest, what was left after taxes and legal fees and Sandra's very reasonable bill, is invested. I don't think about the number every day. Some weeks I forget about it entirely. What I don't forget is the moment I lifted the first guitar case lid. The way Pete stepped back. The smell of that storage unit. Mildew and motor oil, and underneath it, the faint dry smell of something preserved. Something that had been waiting. My grandmother kept a secret for 36 years. She paid $11 a month in 1987 and watched it go up over the decades, and she never said a word. She trusted me to find it. She trusted me to know what to do with it. That part. That's the part I think about. Not the number. Not my brother's voice at 7 in the morning. Not the Christie's display board. Not the letter Sandra sent. Just my grandmother on a Tuesday afternoon saying I had a mind for systems. Saying it like it meant something. Like she already knew what it was going to be worth. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet way you do when enough time has passed to see the shape of things clearly. My brother made a choice in that lawyer's office. He looked at the storage unit and he laughed, because laughter was the fastest way to assign it a value he was comfortable with. He didn't investigate. He didn't ask questions. He had already decided what something was worth based on how it looked from the outside, and that decision, that one small, dismissive moment, is what determined everything that came after. Not luck, not coincidence. His own choices, running in a straight line from that laugh to the letter his lawyer eventually sent and then quietly withdrew. I made a different choice. I drove to Pomona. I took photographs before I touched anything. I called a locksmith, then an appraiser, then a music historian, then a lawyer. Every single step I took was just the next logical thing. No dramatic leap, no moment of genius, just the habit of paying attention that I had been building for 8 years in a job most people would consider unremarkable. That's the part that stays with me. The intelligence that actually matters in your life rarely looks like intelligence while you're using it. It looks like showing up. It looks like documenting things when no one's watching. It looks like reading the fine print on a storage unit lease and thinking, wait, why has this been on auto pay since 1987? It's not glamorous, it doesn't photograph well, but it is the only kind of thinking that was ever going to open those cases. My grandmother understood something I've spent years trying to articulate. She understood that the people who take the most visible things, the houses, the savings accounts, the furniture, aren't always the ones who deserve what's hidden. And she understood, without ever saying it directly, that the person most likely to find what was hidden was the one who had already proven she would look. Not the one with the business degree. Not the one with the nice wife and the navy tie. The one who came on Tuesdays. The one who read the insurance portal. The one who treated the ordinary work of caregiving like it was worth doing carefully. There's something in that about what we owe each other, not just in families, but everywhere. The work that doesn't get celebrated still shapes outcomes. The person who maintains things, documents things, pays attention to things that have no obvious payoff. That person is building something whether anyone acknowledges it or not. Character compounds the same way interest does, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. I'm not angry at my brother. I mean that honestly, even if it sounds like the kind of thing you say to seem like the bigger person. The truth is that his choices diminished him in ways I didn't cause and can't fix. What I can do is try to be someone who doesn't make those same choices, someone who doesn't decide what something is worth before looking, who doesn't confuse the appearance of value with value itself, who doesn't mistake a person's circumstances for their ceiling. My grandmother knew my ceiling. She planned for it quietly for 36 years. That's the kind of faith in someone that makes you want to be worth it.